John, welcome to the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast.
Hey, Simon, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure indeed. Very much looking forward to unpacking your story. I know we're going to get into things and talk about your business, which look, ultimately, I know you went through and you started a company, you built it up, and you've exited, which was Streamline. But maybe you could kick things off and just, I don't know, give us a little bit of your background and where you came from and kind of what led you to get into this space.
Yeah, so I found my way into the world of partner marketing or affiliate marketing, which is what my company Streamline was built around. Right out of college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I landed an internship on the sales team at a company where I was going to university, and while I was still in school, and a couple months into doing the internship, the VP of sales said, "Hey, how would you like a job?" I hadn't graduated yet, but she wanted to bring me in the sales team, so she liked me. I thought I was doing a good job, and so I did that, and just ended up in this interesting, very very unique and specialized industry, and never looked back. I spent early part of my career at a sort of an agency or a network that powered a lot of these affiliate programs, which we can talk about later. And then I moved in-house to a big brand that kind of recruited me out of that company that brought me in-house to build up their program, essentially their partnership program. And so I did that for about 5 years, and did really well and excelled at it, and was sort of climbing the corporate ladder, and going at that pace. And I was a director at a public company when I was 26. I was just doing a lot of like really good things for the career. But quite frankly, I was miserable, and I didn't really want to do the corporate thing. I was just always was sort of itching to maybe do something on my own, or just it just didn't feel like the right path for me. And so I ended up starting the agency out of kind of an accident. I didn't really want to. I didn't mean to start an agency. I think every agency owner that you talk to never really intends to do it. It's sort of as a byproduct of some sort of accident that happens. But I wanted to. After 5 years of doing the corporate thing, I said, "Hey, I'm going to go consult for a little bit. I want to just take a breather and figure out, what makes sense for me, and just take a step back from the day to day of things in the corporate life." And I went and traveled, and so I was consulting for a few months as I was traveling around, and that consulting led to one client, and another one kind of came on, and two or three came on, and I said, well, maybe I should get some help to help me out with these clients. And so I brought somebody on back in the States, and I was over in actually your neck of the woods. I was in Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia, kind of doing this. And before I knew it, I had like 4 people working for me, and I said, well, I better get back to the US to check on them and make sure that things are going well. And then I never left again, and so on and so forth. And the business grew out of that. So it was not intentional. There was never any design behind like, hey, let's go do this. There's going to be some lucrative path. It was really just an accident that was fortuitous in the end.
Yeah. That's it's funny how common that story is. I think how people just wind up in business, and I've asked myself a lot like why that happens, and I think to some degree, you do see a lot of people coming out of corporate, and maybe the environment's changed, and a corporate restructure or whatever, and they've kind of almost been forced to do their own thing. But I'm interested in what you're saying about corporate kind of not feeling right. So I sort of get the sense that maybe in your situation there was a bit more of a calling to do something different already that may have kind of led to it.
Yeah, I think so I lasted as long as I did in the corporate world because I had a lot of leeway and flexibility in my role. Like they sort of, I built when I was at this company, I built a very sizable percentage of their revenue as its sort of own line of business and what I was doing. And it was, I was the only one that knew what was happening. It was, it was a single person shop. But we were like 30% of the company's revenue. So it was incredibly important and strategic. But I was left alone to kind of do what I wanted to do. And that was why I stuck around for a long time. But I think I've always had an issue with, I don't know if it's a problem with authority or something like that. I've always been a bit of a rebel, and I just kind of wanted to march to my own beat and do my own thing in life. And I think that calling in business sort of leads itself to an entrepreneurial mindset. Like for better or for worse, I don't like taking direction from people. I like doing it my way. And oftentimes that's not the right way to do it, but like I still enjoy that control, right? I think a lot of people kind of have that mindset. And the entrepreneurial path just is kind of perfect, I think, for people that operate that way. From what I've seen.
I can totally relate. In fact, I think everybody at our team, we kind of commonly joke that we're all corporate escapees, right? We just don't like being told what to do. Certainly don't like political kind of machinations, and it just doesn't work for some, right? And I think you got to go beat a different path, and hey, it's hard work, but I think I like what you say about it's not always the right thing, because I don't know how I've lost count of how many mistakes I've made in my businesses, but I probably power through them with enthusiasm and just sheer desire to keep doing my own thing. So yeah, I guess you got to find a balance in there somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, it's I mean, that's learning from mistakes is really the best thing that I've done. As long as you're able to actually learn from them, right? Like you're bound to make
Yeah.
mistakes, especially you first time starting out doing something, first businesses. Like, I mean, the amount, as you said, the amount of times that I messed up and did something wrong. I mean, it's endless, right? But you learn from them, and you apply it, and you don't do it again. Like that's where the real learning comes from. And I think you grow so quickly when that happens, especially when it's like you and your bottom line and your money and everything it's you on the table, right? You have to adapt and learn from things.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. You kicked off your business. It sounded like you kind of really just flew straight into it. You had a client, and then you started growing. So fundamentally, you're bootstrapping, right? But I imagine when you first started, you must have taken a dip in income and all the rest of it. Like, what were those early days like? And was it a scramble to kind of
Yeah, so I was fortunate, and I again, I think my business that I did, it was, again, we were sort of ultimately Streamline became an agency that was tech enabled. We had a sort of tech infrastructure that we built out down the road, but we were essentially providing service. And what I did to land my first couple of clients, and really my first client was my prior company. As I said to you, like, we were the business that I built within that business was incredibly important. It was 30-40% of the revenue. It was very strategic for them, and no one knew what the hell I did. So when I left, I said, look, I'm going to go consult. I want to break from the corporate world. You can pay me this much to continue to run this business for you, or you can, good luck, and you got 2 weeks. And that was actually a pretty easy negotiation from that perspective. So I actually, my take home was roughly about the same when I started out, which made it a little bit easier to do it. Now, that was until I started hiring employees, and then you had cash flow issues, and the nightmare that became down the road. But like, initially, I actually had a nice income going into it, and I decreased my actual take home pay as the business grew, because you just have to keep reinvesting everything into that type of business. And as you bootstrap it, like, your cash flow is not there. I always joke to people, like, even if you say you have $1 million of profit for a business, I promise you that most business owners are not pulling $1 million out every year. Like, it's just sitting in the bank.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly right. Keeping your powder dry for all those things are coming. Yeah. And so talk to me a bit about that sort of ramp up. I mean, your first client, and that's an awesome place to come from, that you can just pick up your previous employer as your first client. But what did that first sort of year or two look like in terms of that growth trajectory?
Yeah, so we were we landed a couple of sizable clients really early on, which I think was really important for the business. And our industry, again, it's a large industry. So the affiliate marketing and partner marketing space, it's a digital marketing medium. It actually represents about 17 or 18% of all online e-commerce sort of is driven by affiliate or partner marketing. It's a sizable percentage of online revenue, but there are a select few number of people who actually know how to work in the space, and especially on the brand side, know how to build these types of affiliate programs. It's actually very, very specialized and very niche. And so we were able to get some really big clients early on in the first couple of years, that sort of propelled us forward in terms of driving scale and velocity for the business. So we landed like Expedia and T-Mobile and Microsoft, like as a 5, 10, 15 person company, which usually you have no business working with those types of firms, right? At that size. But because we were so specialized in an important industry, we were able to land those clients. So we grew really, really quickly, which was great. And we went, the first, I don't know, 2-3 years in, we were 15, 20 people, something like that. But with that and the growth and the acceleration of that, it was really challenging managing that growth through sort of bootstrapping it. We're a service company, so we do work for a client for 30 days and we bill them. And then if you're working with the Microsofts and the Expedias of the world, they pay you net 30 if you're very lucky. It's usually closer to net 60, net 90, and they're always late and they always have some reason for it. So you basically had to front cash for about 3 or 4 months of operating expenses before we saw a dollar come in from the work. So in growing that rapidly and hiring that many people, it became really difficult. So basically, I didn't take money out of the company. I didn't pay myself for 18 months, I think, during the super high growth phase. So you just kind of have to do that at certain phases to allow for that.
Yeah, indeed. And I probably should have asked this question earlier, but just for the uninitiated, can you just give us what is affiliate marketing and kind of what was the core of what your business did?
Yeah, so the premise of an affiliate marketing is simple in practice, but very complicated in actual reality. But essentially, an affiliate can be any sort of online entity that partners with a brand to drive customers to that brand in exchange for compensation. So a blog, for example, that is writing about a pair of shoes that that blogger really likes, and it has a link in that article, and that will go to a retailer or brand. And if a consumer is reading that blog and they click on that link and they go to the brand, they buy that pair of shoes or anything from that brand, the blog gets a commission and a cut of the sale for driving that transaction. And that's the most basic form of it. There are thousands of different types of affiliates, and they could be influencers on social media. They could be large cashback coupon sites, voucher sites, big mass media publications that have millions of readers. It take a lot of different varieties. But essentially what we did as an agency and a service provider is that we would work with the brand and we would go out and find those affiliates for the brand and manage the relationships on their behalf. So we would go and work with hundreds or thousands of partners for brands and build up very sizable and scalable programs, just manage the entire relationship for them, and handle the sort of service element of those programs.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's something I've sort of been familiar with, but not, only at a very, very high level. I think, it's very, really interesting space. So what was the model like? I mean, you just mentioned there that large clients paying, 30, 60, 90 days, etc. But did you typically, was it sort of fixed fee projects? Did you have some sort of ongoing revenue stream? Like what was the typical kind of engagement like?
Yeah, so we always did usually long-term retainers plus performance fees for us as an agency based on how well the program that we built did, right? So it might look something like a brand would pay us $10,000, $15,000 a month as a fixed retainer, and then we would get 1% of the incremental revenue that we drive through that affiliate channel. So if we take the affiliate channel from $1 million a month in revenue to $2 million a month, right? We've done $1 million in incremental. We get 1% of that, and that's so we're billing $20,000 a month in that case, right? And that's kind of the model that we worked under.
Yeah, cool. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And it was fairly reliable in terms of, so we did longer retainers. It wasn't really project oriented work. I think in the service world, I think it's really complicated in managing and forecasting that when you're doing service and short term contracts. Like even if we did, do something for 6 months and then the client decided to not keep working with us, like we always had longer term engagements. It's just very, very difficult to forecast even hiring and personnel and everything else that goes into that if you're working on 2-3 month engagements. Like, and we had a lot of clients approach us asking for shorter term things. We always shied away from it. It just wouldn't make sense for us to put the resources behind it for that sort of short of an engagement.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And how long typically would clients stay with you? I mean, did you have some that were just ongoing, or was there a typical cycle they went through?
Yeah, we had a really, really long retention rate. And granted, the company was in business for just over 7 years before we were acquired, so we didn't have a massive history, but we had about a 95% client retention rate through our initial contracts. So
Nice.
we basically, and really kind of how I look at the business, like with our sales, marketing, acquisition costs, and everything else. So we didn't make a lot of money the first year of working with a client. That basically covers everything else, right? The profit is made year 2, 3, 4. So we had some big clients that stuck with us for 5-6 years, through the transaction, or still with us today, the new firm that I'm at. But we did really well in terms of retaining clients. We did exceptional work, and that was an important part of it. We made sure that we were actually delivering what the clients were asking for. This was a very legitimate practice in terms of the work that we were delivering, and so the retention rates were really high just because of that. And again, it's kind of like it's this interesting industry that is very specialized. So even if you are a brand and hey, I'm paying an agency a good amount of money, but I may want to bring that in house, finding somebody that actually knows what they're doing to replace an agency that has 4 or 5 people working on it, historical context, data, everything else, it's actually very tough to do that. So we were fortunate that there wasn't a lot of potential for that to happen. The only other option is you potentially go to a competitor, and really like we were kind of leaders in the space along with the company that I ended up selling to. So you didn't have too many choices in terms of where you would go.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about, so 7 years, you start this company, we talked a little bit about those early days and what that's like. And I think, anyone listening to this who's done a startup, I think really kind of feels that in their bones, right? Those first couple of years of running hard and you start employing people and you're growing and you're getting traction and it's exciting, but there's a lot of hard work in that, right? I mean, what was it like as the kind of founder leader experience? Typically, I know with my own business, we run a service-based business. Exit Advisory Group's our core business, and I know what kind of a focus it put on me as the leader, and the amount of effort and work, and there's somewhere in there's this transition of you've got to start handing things off to other people because you're just overloaded. I mean, well, that was certainly my experience. I mean, what was that like for you?
So very similar. I mean, I think I had a hard, as pretty much every founder will tell you, it's very hard to let go of things. As an entrepreneur, right? Like you want to kind of have your hands in everything. You want to be controlling things. The reality is like there are people that are much better at doing certain roles than you are, and like you have to eventually learn the hard way how that plays out. So my story is actually kind of interesting in how that happened. I was very much similar to you. Like I tried to do everything for the first 4 or 5 years or so, and then I was working like just crazy amounts. I was stressing myself out, and the company again, high growth phases, everything else was going well, but I was burning myself out, and I one day kind of waking up, and my throat was just like really hurting, and I couldn't like I was having a hard time even like drinking water. It was just like I was just really not feeling good. But I was exhausted. We had a big RFP coming up or something like that, and we had an offsite for the whole company that we were doing like the next weekend. So I just kind of pushed through it and just dealt with it. I couldn't really eat much. It was just, and I wasn't sick. It was just like my throat was just killing me. And we ended up going to this offsite, and I showed up, and the team was like, "You don't look good, man. Like this is not what's going on with you, right?" And we were up in the mountains at this cabin, and I stuck it through for a couple of nights, but they were really like, you got to go to the hospital. Like, this is not okay. Cause I couldn't eat anything. It was just, at that point, it was just like, it was not in good shape. So ended up at the hospital, and what had happened for somehow, like I ended up with a tear in my esophagus. It was, is what had happened. Cause I had, sorry, I should have backed it. I forgot the best part of the story. So I'd gotten shingles like a month beforehand. So I got shingles from the stress. So I was a little bit confused on this one. So I had shingles, kind of got over it. The rash went away. It was awful, but it was not good. It was not in a good place. And then what had actually happened by the time I ended at the hospital, the shingles had actually spread to my throat, like inside of my throat, and it had torn the esophagus and kind of ruptured. So I ended up in the ER, and the doctor sat me down, and he was asking me, "Hey, what's going on? Are you stressed out? What's happening?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm working 16 hours a day, and I have been for the past 4 years. I haven't taken a break. I'm extremely stressed out." And he sat me down. I was like, "Dude, like this is not good. Like you could have died, right?" Really, because my electrolytes were all over the place. I hadn't gotten enough fluids in me. I was really in a bad shape, and I spent a couple days in the ER just kind of recovering. And after that, it was like you have to slowly work your way back into working a full-time thing. You have to take time off, So I did, and I recovered for a couple months. And during that period of time, all the things that I was controlling, somebody had to do them, right? And so the rest of the team kind of picked them up. And funny enough, of course, everybody that's been through this will know. By the time I got back and started taking over those roles and those responsibilities, they were being done in a much more effective way than when I was doing them. And so I said, "Okay, fine, you guys can continue to run with things that way."
Shame it took illness to kind of, to get that all to happen, right?
It's funny though. I mean, a lot of people have that sort of scenario. It's like they eventually they work so hard until they burn out, which is really what it was. I mean, it was my body essentially giving up and saying, "You need a break, dude." But a lot of
Yeah.
entrepreneurs have that happen to them, and there's a reckoning that happens. And like, fortunately, I had an amazing team around me that like picked up the slack and just ran with it. But oftentimes it can be not a good outcome, right, when that happens. So I was fortunate, but yeah, it's something a lot of entrepreneurs go through, and I think the only lesson I would say is like you just have to you can't people can't work at that clip for an indefinite period of time. Like maybe if you're Elon, right? Like there's some people that can do it, but like most folks, you will eventually burn out. You won't get make yourself very unhealthy, and it just will not be a good result at the end of the day.
Yeah, I look, totally agree. I mean, having had all this experience, I mean, is there how would you do things differently? I mean, it's a hard thing to hand things over, particularly as you're kind of growing and you're putting on new people and all this sort of stuff. But like, is there if you had your time again, is there how would you approach it?
Yeah, I think the way that I would look at it is understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are as an entrepreneur, right? You're building a business, there are certain elements of it, right? You have your finance stuff, and you have sales and marketing, and you have in our case, we had client work, you have HR, personnel stuff, right? The major things that sort of make up a company. I'm very good at sales and marketing. Like that's what I do. I'm good at positioning, strategy, that sort of stuff. I'm horrible at finance. I'm probably the worst manager on the planet when it comes to actually managing people and dealing with personnel. So like, and I knew that all about myself, right? I knew that going into it. Like everybody, if you really look in the mirror, you kind of know what you're good at. You know what your strengths and your weaknesses are, right? Now, of course, the entrepreneur mindset, like you think you can do anything because that's why we get into doing businesses in the first place. And so you kind of trick yourself into thinking, yeah, I can do that. I can run finance. It's not that hard. It's QuickBooks, right? You can just plug it in there and you so the way that I would do it differently is just I would understand what I was good at and put 110% of my energy into that, which would have, I think, in hindsight, had I just focused on that side of things, the company would have been much more successful long run. And I would have, outsourced those roles to people that were good at them. And even like the finance stuff, it's a bookkeeper. It's not that hard, right? You find somebody, it's really not that challenging, at least for the size of business that we were at the time. As opposed to trying to control everything. And like that would save a lot of pain and time and everything else. And I think just playing to your strengths is super important.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. Yeah, it's funny how often I see this issue. And I was chatting to a prospective client yesterday, same sort of thing. The husband was building and just couldn't, didn't want to hire people and didn't want the responsibility of hiring people and feeling like they were responsible for their their staff's well-being. And what happens if the company doesn't fail and they lose their job, and I'd feel responsible for that and all this sort of stuff. But in my experience, when we've hired the right people based around values and culture and things like that, I've never ever regretted it. Those people have come in and just done amazing things and things I never expected. And I've, as I say, never ever looked back and gone, oh geez, we probably didn't need to do that hire. Like they've actually proved valuable in ways I didn't expect.
Yeah, and
So
I think there's something you touched on there, like the right culture fit is and that hire, and especially like earlier stages of a business too. Like it's so important, and I'm very fortunate that I had people that I brought in who were exactly that right fit. They sort of rolled with the company throughout the years, and they grew with it, and they were adaptable. And I think even earlier stage with those hires, they have to be somewhat entrepreneurial themselves, right? They have to be willing to tackle a million different things at once and kind of pivot whenever they need to. But finding those right roles is super critical. And I wish I had found more of them early on. I wish I had relied more on them. I think it was still like this give and take of like, can I actually delegate? Do I want to control things? But I did have some really good people in my core. And conversely, I also had some like very bad hires that like I stuck around with for a long time because I thought, we'll make this work. And, they have the right pedigree and experience, right? But then just like ended up personality wise or culture fit or whatever, just were not the right choices, right? And so those are other things that you learn down the road after having experience doing it, right? You know the people, like it's kind of in your gut. You feel them, and you do that first interview. You're like, this person's gonna be a rock star. And you also and every single time I was like, yeah, I know they're gonna be great, and they were, and they lasted, and they were awesome. They were fantastic to work with. And then I also have those ones where it's like, I don't know, kind of in the back of your head, you're thinking like maybe this isn't the right choice, but then you know the people on the team are like, oh, they're good, they'll be okay, they have experience, whatever, and then it ends up being a nightmare. So I just trust my gut on hires. It's something that served me well down the road, but learned the hard way again.
Yeah, once again couldn't agree more. My wife and I, my wife's the co-founder of our business, and in fact, we've been in every business we've ever done. We've done together, and it's hindsight is a pain in the ass sometimes, right? Because you look back and go, man, it was obvious, we knew it, right? So yeah. Anyway, so talk to me a little bit here. Like, you've had this experience. You've been unwell. You've no doubt been shaken a little bit by it. It's made you rethink perhaps some priorities and whatnot. When did the idea of selling the business kind of really start to crystallize?
Yeah, so we'd been approached by people after I don't know, even a year or two in business. So we'd always had other agencies usually kind of like calling on us, right? They didn't do what we did, and they want us to sort of add that capability into their clients, or our competitors in the space. So there were a couple that were larger than us that were trying to get larger, right? To sort of doing roll ups and things like that. And so we'd had conversations and sort of entertained it. And I would say like we always, I think it's always a good decision to have conversations and to like high level discuss things. Hey, tell me about what you're trying to do from, in terms of learning about your acquirers, and just so you can understand the market and sort of understand what they're looking for. Even if you're not necessarily interested in doing a transaction right now, like just kind of go into it with an open mind, understand valuations, how the things sort of work, so that when you are kind of really ready to sell, you have a lot of background and experience, as opposed to like doing it for the first time. You have those initial conversations and you are inexperienced in doing it. So we flirted a lot for years. I think by like the time we sold, I think I looked at like 20 some odd LOIs, right? Like
Wow.
Versions of
That's
them, right, from different companies, right? But we looked at a lot of them before we pulled the trigger. And in hindsight, it's probably too many, but we at least we were having conversations with every potential company that could acquire us for years before we did a deal. Whether that was, again, folks in our space, a strategic entity, even some of the technology partners we worked with. Like we were talking to them and sort of exploring things. And by the time I was sort of ready to go into it, I had a very good idea of like what we were actually worth, who the players were, who we could really potentially partner with, and the sort of structural way in which all these deals operate. So it's not something where you're going in with limited knowledge of it. It was at that point I kind of knew what I was in store for, and that was helpful.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a lot of LOIs. I mean, I in our core business, we've had a lot of clients come to us because they've had that proverbial tap on the shoulder, and then they've done a lot of courting and talking, and they end up investing a lot of time. And then, after 6-9 months of doing this dance with prospective buyers, they either get lowballed or the buyer pulls out because they've had a change of strategy or something. And so a lot of people, I've had a lot of business owners who feel super burned by that whole thing, and they've just wasted so much time and effort. And of course, spending time on these things can be a distraction from the core business. So I'm curious about, like, were you handling a lot of that yourself? Was that an impact on the core business, or had you already built yourself out? Like, what was it like, that whole experience for you?
So, it definitely was a distraction, but I think it paid dividends in the end. I think it was like, as I was having those conversations, it was as much for me, it was learning about the process as it was for potentially getting a deal done, I think, in those early stages. But you're right. I mean, it's exhausting to go through the conversations. Every time we looked at the sort of offers, we kind of, we were growing at such a tremendous clip that like I just didn't feel they were high enough, right? It's really what it came down to, right? We would talk to folks, they would say, okay, well, and to give everyone context, agencies or service related businesses, we had a tech component, but really we're a service company. in almost every case, you're acquired on a multiple of your EBITDA, right? And that's kind of the industry standard for our world. And the way that works is you look at like your trailing 12-month average. Generally, that's how everybody does it. If you get a bank to finance it, which most people are doing, they have to do a quality of earnings report, which looks at your trailing 12 months. And it's just a very standard process. And because we were growing so quickly, like we'd sign business and we'd like hire people or we'd hire ahead of it. And so like our trailing 12 months, if we had stopped and just sat flat, we would have looked really nicely profitable. And you probably get a nice high multiple on that. But because we kept investing and doubling down, our trailing 12 months always didn't look great. If you look at the sort of forward-looking run rate, it looked really positive, but acquirers just wouldn't do a deal based on that. So we would get offers that were like not insignificant, and it made you think about, hey, maybe I should just do this, or maybe it's somewhere in the ballpark. But and then we'd get another like giant client that signed on, and it was just we kind of pulled away from them as we were looking at things. And that's why we had so many LOIs. It was just because like people realized we were growing really quickly. They wanted to come in and to kind of scoop up the business. We entertained the conversations. They put numbers on paper. We could sort of see what it looked like. And then again, it just didn't make sense in the time when we were going through the conversations until we finally decided to pull the trigger.
Yeah. It's a really interesting conundrum, because I've once again had clients in the similar space, right? They're growing and saying, well, hang on a minute, like if I hang on to my business for another year, and that's almost a little bit of a trap for business owners as well, because if your objective is to exit, then at some point you actually have to form a deal. But how you value that future curve. And in fact, I interviewed somebody else on the podcast yesterday who analyzes customer purchases and buying habits and everything else to build more detailed forecasts, so that they can kind of net present value that to today. And so it is a fascinating piece, right? Because it's always you're selling the promise of tomorrow. So I've got so many questions for you, actually. So if I step on anything that's confidential, please just let me know. But first question is, can you give us a sense of the size of your company around this time? Like, I mean, just broadly, like 7-figure turnover, 8-figure turnover, that sort of stuff. Is that?
Yeah. So we were at the time we exited, we were a little over 35 full-time employees. We were mid 7 figures in top line revenue, and we were really, really, really profitable. We built the business in a very lean manner. I didn't have a lot of HR and marketing folks and stuff like that. It was basically just the people doing work in the account. So we were close to 50% profit margins, right? So
wow.
So from an EBIT number, so we were the right sort of size to be acquired by the firm we ended up selling to. There's, again, in the service world, there's like, if you're less than $1 million in EBITDA, people will buy you, but you're going to get like a 2 or 3x multiple. It's pretty standard. Maybe slightly higher than that if you're really growing and you have some cool stuff, but it's pretty low. Once you cross the $1 million threshold, things kind of open up and they change, because you can get banks to actually finance that. There's getting to $1 million profit is a heavy lift in general, and so there's very much a likelihood that's going to continue. You're going to get a higher multiple from that. In again, our world, maybe it's 4 to 6 or somewhere in that neighborhood. As you get higher than that, it starts to go up maybe 7, 8. And then once you get to 4 or 5 million, then you become kind of a portfolio type of company, right? You are the larger portfolio that's acquired by a PE firm. And then you go out and you buy other firms in your industry or ancillary industry. So we were the right size to be scooped up by a portfolio of companies, which is what happened. So we were definitely not big enough to be our own platform, but we were a very attractive target to kind of like bolt on initially to the deal that we ended up doing.
Yeah, that's cool. That's super helpful. And I think for anyone listening to this, like those thresholds of size are really important to pay attention to. I know in many of the transactions we've done, and certainly many of the private equity firms that we've worked with or speak to on a regular basis, so many of them will say, look, we don't even want to look at it unless they're doing a minimum 2 million EBITDA. Like it's just not worth doing for them. And so, size fundamentally matters when it comes to business valuations. And
the reason for that too, just for context, is that like it from it, and now I'm on the buy side now, so I can talk through these things fairly intelligently. Like the amount of money and effort that it takes to acquire a company, whether you are 500,000 in EBITDA or 3 million in EBITDA is pretty much the same. Like there's actually not that much variance in it. And so if you're going to spend your energy as an acquirer to go and buy somebody, like, and you have 5 options, you're buying the one that has probably the biggest impact, and it's probably going to be the highest EBITDA number.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's bang for buck. And, we did a transaction recently, and the buyers, we had a good relationship with them, and they were saying their budget for due diligence was $700,000 on this particular transaction. They told me they didn't quite hit it, but they were certainly over $500,000.
Yeah.
So, that's a lot of cash to spend on a due diligence process. So, as you say, I mean, you've got to start weighing that against the actual benefit of the transaction itself, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's really how most acquirers look at it. So again, there are certain thresholds depending on the industry and vertical that you're in, but at least in our space, like, there are very clear guidelines around, what you need to get to. And, we were well within the nice little sort of middle of the range there. And I knew in my heart that, like, I didn't want to go and be that larger portfolio company that would then, I didn't want to try to drag the business to 4 or 5 million EBIT. Like I think I maybe could have gotten there in another 10 years, but like it would have taken a long time. And I think that, again, we can talk about like post transaction if you want to get into that at some point, but like I get to do the stuff now that I want to do, as opposed to being like the founder CEO of a portfolio company and doing that. I was done I wanted to take a break from being a CEO for a little bit. So it was the right time to do it.
And what a common experience too, so many business owners, they are usually good at one element of the business and they're sick of doing everything else. So it's, once again, very, very common for those listening. But one of the questions I wanted to ask you, it seems to me that Streamline was quite niched in its service, right? I mean, you were a specialist in this field of affiliate marketing. And one of the questions I hear coming up a lot from business owners is, they kind of hit this crossroad in their growth trajectory, and they're asking themselves, should I start cross-selling different services to our client base, or should we double down on our niche and try to sell more of what we do, or less products, less services to more people? Just keep going hard down that channel. And I'm curious if you've got any thoughts around those two strategies and how they might play into a transaction and ultimately business value.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conundrum that a lot of business owners get themselves into. I would say, we thought about different business lines a number of different times as we were running the company, and what we always landed on is that we were, again, specialized in niche, and it was in this partnership world, and we couldn't really think of another offering that would make a ton of sense to the clients we were working with and the people that we were working with at those clients. So, for example, if we would have started offering to do paid search, for example, our contacts at the client are not the people that are running paid search. We also would have gone from competing with other agencies in our space that were somewhere around the same size as us, maybe twice as large, but to go and competing with 1,000 employee companies, right, that have AOR engagements with these firms, and you start to really tread into some dangerous waters there with that type of offering. So the only way we would have done another line of business is if we would have found something that was ancillary that made a ton of sense to sell directly to the contacts that we're either working with or maybe one step removed from them. That would have been a very easy sell that was sort of similar to our industry and could be cross-sold really easily and effectively. And we kind of knew a little bit about what that industry would have been, and we're doing it now at the current firm. But at the time, we never ended up doing it. And I think we also didn't want to distract ourselves from what was working really well. Like by the time we were really rolling, like we had a really solid model. We knew exactly what we were doing. We knew the service. We had everything ironed out. And to take your energy away from that to go and try to build some new process, which is a new line of business, it's going to take new operational procedures. You have to build everything from scratch again. Like you would have to take a massive amount of your energy and effort and put it towards that. At the same time, we would have, had I not done the transaction, we would have hit a ceiling in terms of our growth. Like that is absolutely what would have happened, because we would have been competing with other agencies in our space that had private equity money, that were scaling really aggressively, had massive marketing teams, massive sales teams. Like we would not have continued to grow at the clip we would have been, and we would have probably been forced into doing something else if we wanted to keep growing in some way. And we never crossed that bridge because I was, quite frankly, just unsure of our ability to execute on it. But it is something that people run into all the time, and it's a tough choice. You have to really, it is a very much a big gamble at that point, because if it doesn't go well, you've just sunk massive amounts of energy, capital into doing something, and then you've distracted yourself from the main core business that may have been doing very, very well and been very profitable. I think there's an argument that it could go both ways. So.
Yeah. Look, that's really interesting, and thanks for sharing that insight. I mean, to me, it kind of really makes sense why you were such a good portfolio acquisition, right? I mean, if you've got this large company that's already doing other forms of marketing, other services, and they don't do what you do, or they've tried it and they've not been very good at it, and they can just bolt you in, and now you're the experts and you're already an industry leader, it just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's a typical portfolio strategy, especially for lines of business that they're not in, but are, again, they're like ancillary to what they do, right? And so then you have the cross sell functionality, and there's just a ton of synergies that go into that. It's the 1 + 1 = 3 concept, right? It's really kind of what it is.
Absolutely, but that cross sell scenario is coming from a base of a much larger company with bigger clients and more of them and all that sort of stuff, right? So it just, once again, I mean, it ticks all the boxes. I am curious to understand a little bit of the, can you talk us through what it was like from the deal? So that when you meet the buyer, did these buyers approach you and kind of, or did you approach them? And how long did it all take, like that whole process?
So we, again, a small industry, and so the company that acquired Streamline is named Acceleration Partners, and they were our competitor. They're a good deal larger than us, but they did effectively the same thing. We worked in a very similar way, big enterprise clients, highly strategic work. And I had known the founders for years, and I was very close with them. We were frenemies, if you want to call it that. And kind of the same way with every agency owner in our space, like we got kind of all know each other. And so we had been talking to a different group for a while, and we were getting to a point, this was at the end of 2020. So the pandemic had happened, world ended. I was at that point just really burnt out. I mean, you go from running a company for years and the stress and everything goes into that, to then going into, is my business going to make it through this? I'm not sure, what's going to happen. I mean, just the stress and anxiety that was born out of that experience was not something I want to go through again. And so we were really entertaining deep conversations with another group that had private equity money and was a very aggressive acquirer and really good guys. I liked him a lot. We were sort of negotiating an LOI, and I randomly reached out to the president of the firm that ended up acquiring us, not around the deal or anything like that. I actually asked him a question about something in our industry. And we ended up hopping on a call, and I was just chit chatting with him, and he's, asking him what was going on, how business was. And, he's like, well, we got something really interesting, that we're going to announce, in a few weeks, and you're going to be the first one that we call. And the light bulb went off. I'm like, oh, great. You guys are getting acquired. That's really interesting. And I was like, well, Matt, it's interesting you say that. I'm looking at a piece of paper right now that like you guys would probably not want me to sign. So, and he's like, hold on, hold that thought. I'm going to make 2 phone calls and I'll get right back to you. And so he hung up. Bob, then the founder of Acceleration Partners, called me 2 minutes later. He's like, hey, listen, like on the down low, we're doing a deal right now. Let me call the buyer and the private equity group and see if I can disclose anything to you. 5 minutes after that, he calls me back, and the managing director of Mountain Gate Capital is on the line, Bennett, and Mountain Gate is a private equity firm that I actually knew very well. I'd met with them previously. They're like the Harvard of private equity for service firms in the US. They've had tremendous success with service businesses, and like I wanted to work with them, and I was actually trying to sell myself into one of their portfolio companies previously. So I'd met with the guys at Mountain Gate. Anyway, so they got on the line. They're like, look, we're closing this deal with Acceleration Partners at the end of November. We can give you an LOI right now. Our deal with them won't actually be done, but you have to kind of take it as good faith that we're going to get this thing done, and we'll wrap you guys up before the end of the year. And so within That phone call, they put together their management presentation and everything over the weekend. The call was on Friday. They turned around this massive proposal by Sunday evening, sent it to us along with an LOI. We did a couple turns on that and then signed it on that Monday. So it was like 4 days of just conversations. But the thing that impressed me is like they were like, you guys were the first target on our list anyways. We want to do this deal with you. We're gonna work through the weekend. And it ended up being a better offer than the group that I had been talking to, just from a financial perspective, and then also getting in at the early stage of that portfolio to get the growth out of it. And so we ended up signing it at that point. So it was a very quick LOI process, and then the close was done in 45 days in the middle of Q4 at the end of 2020, which was interesting to go through that.
Man. That's phenomenal. 4 days. I mean, seriously, I think you've just broken some kind of record there, right? That's phenomenal.
But back to the points that I was talking about previously about having conversations and like knowing your market value, what the industry is doing, and everything else. It was like, I was not unrealistic in the expectation of a multiple, right? You can't go in there at our stage and be like, I want a 15x on my EBITDA, right? And that would have killed the deal, right? We knew what the industry multiples were. It's not like you're going to go in and ask for something outrageously more than that. So knowing how things work, understanding the potential players in the space, right? And again, like once you're ready to move quickly, like you kind of have to in certain cases, right? A lot of deals get done in that quick, rapid succession because the timing is right. And folks like drag things out and want to negotiate and waver on offers, and deals can fall apart just as easily. So the timing was right, the buyer was right, the numbers were right, and we closed that thing as fast as we possibly could.
Yeah, that's cool. I love the fact, and this I think is another good takeaway for people thinking about transactions is you can move fast like that when you've got motivated buyer, motivated seller. There's already an element of trust because you kind of knew these guys a little bit. There's like the fact that the buyers were doing this bigger deal, they've invested money, they're moving, there's momentum, right? Like it's not like somebody tapping you on the shoulder and kind of just sniffing around a little bit and kind of asking you for information, but they're not committed. And I think that's a massive difference between your situation and I think where we've seen a lot of businesses come to us saying they've just been frustrated.
Yeah. It definitely happens too. I mean, like we had a lot of people knock on the shoulder and say, hey, we want to learn more. And it never went anywhere. The thing that did accelerate it, I mean, I finally, again, this is learning, thinking I can do everything myself after trying to sell, close deals or whatever, doing it on my own. We finally hired an investment bank to do it for us. And they got the deal done. And I can definitely say that like without them, we would have never actually closed the thing. There's no way we would have done it in Q4. They were instrumental in getting the deal formalized, negotiating the LOI for us, and handling the financial difficult conversations, and then helping us actually process the transaction and move through all the due diligence and everything. Like there is no way we would have done it without them.
Yeah, look, another great tip, having a good deal team around you to help you get it done. Can I ask a question? I don't want to tread on confidentiality here, but when we've seen, all of our deals that we've done and observed, I find that consideration to the vendors tends to be paid in one, two, or all of these following buckets. Obviously there's cash up front. There can sometimes be a deferred component that's just not at risk. But hey, we're going to pay you in increments over a couple of years. And then there's potentially an earn out. So without getting into micro detail, can you tell us what sort of buckets were involved for yourself?
Yeah, and I can actually disclose a lot of this because Mountain Gate's pretty famous for the way they operate in this world. So they don't like earnouts, and they generally don't do them, which is a very attractive component of doing this sort of deal, because everything else we ever looked at always had at least a year, if not 2 or 3 years from an earnout, which generally earnouts don't always end well for the seller, and most times they don't. So we didn't have an earnout. The structure of the deal, it was about 70% cash, 30% equity in the portfolio company, and in every single scenario that at least Mountain Gate and this private equity firm has been in, the folks that sort of sold into the platform and were rolled their equity over, made considerably more from that equity than they did of the initial like cash. Now, I wasn't going to sell the business and leave all that money on the table. So you pull enough out to like, yeah, if things go sideways and I never see another dollar from it, like I'm still set. But the ideal scenario is that equity that you roll into it ends up quadrupling in 4 or 5 years, and that's what they've done really consistently time and time again. And so that's why you do it that way. But yeah, they had no earnout. There was an escrow. I think 10% of the deal was held back in escrow for 12 months, just to cover any sort of crazy scenario happening. But other than that, yeah, it was really straightforward. And again, that's why we really liked the way the deal was structured. There's no strings attached, very simple, and easy to do a deal again from a seller's perspective. You know exactly what you're getting.
Yeah, that's great, and congrats on obviously negotiating a great deal. It is a funny one, and I talk to a lot of buyers. We're doing a lot of different transactions, but it's funny how often so many buyers, I think, are trying to hammer home this earn-out component because, and let's be honest, they're just worried. That's just risk mitigation, right? They're worried about something. They're trying to manage risk. Sometimes they're trying to manage risk a little too heavily on their own behalf at the expense of the vendor, which I'm always sort of pointing out that you've got to find some middle ground here because your push to de-risk for yourself, your push to in this direction of earnouts actually can just burn goodwill as well. The last thing you want is that a seller comes over and just despises you for the way you behaved and doesn't want to be there anymore. And for anyone who's listened to a number of the episodes of this podcast, I've had plenty of guests who just walked away from their earnout because they just went, I just don't want to be here anymore. And so, I guess this always, to me, comes back to the number one rule of transactions, and that is don't damage the asset you're buying. And often that includes the people.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I would say, like, being on the buy side now, and we are, acquiring and doing that. I'm leading a heavy hand in that. I think we have conversations. If we're really that concerned about a potential acquisition target where we would have to put some heavy earnout component into it, it's not a good deal for us. Yeah. Like, we kind of like, if we're not certain that like, hey, this is going to be the right strategic fit, it's going to be the right fit from a culture perspective. It's going to be that, again, the 1 + 1 = 3 sort of thing. We love the management team, everything else. Like, we shouldn't be doing the deal. Like, at the end of the day, I mean, it's if you really need to put that much, you got to hedge your risk on it by putting some massive earnout on it. I think, yeah, there's just so many potential complications that come with that. And as you said, like, unless if you're a seller and you have some long earnout and 6 months into it, you realize you're not going to hit that earnout, the energy that you're going to put into that business is now non-existent, right? You are looking for your exit. You're out of there as soon as you can. And I think you're just sort of hamstringing things if you do it that way, like as a buyer. I very much believe in the philosophy of Mountain Gate, and again, like they've been really successful at it. So I think you can't knock their process.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this comes back to one of our early comments in this conversation. It was about culture, right? I mean, you got somebody there who's bitter about things, and they've lost their energy. I mean, the knock-on effect to company culture could be far more damaging and far more of an issue as well. So I think it's so much of these things can be a delicate kind of balance. But at the end of the day, as you're pointing out with Mountain Gate and companies like them, there are well-beaten, well-worn paths on how to do this and do this well. And I think if we take the lessons from those kind of transactions, you can certainly reduce the risk of things going wrong.
Yeah, I think also when you're especially if you're looking at private equity firms, and there's a lot of them out there, right? Yeah. The one thing that I will say, and again, I'm not trying to, Bennett or the guys at Mountain Gate, listen to this. I'm not trying to blow you guys up too much, but we had all these conversations, and every private equity conversation usually ended up with them asking, so you're making X amount of dollars with this many people. How do you make this many more dollars with the same amount of people, right? How do you squeeze more blood out of the stone, right? It really, without doubt, they all kind of got to that point. And like, Mountain Gate never asked that. Like, it was like, tell us about the culture. Like, what are you most proud of? How do you reward people? How do you motivate them? And like, they're so focused on that. And I think that's what makes them kind of unique in this space, because again, like what they've, as you said, they figured this model out. It's like, you build great teams around great people, you enable it with technology, and you have a massive result down the road. And like, it's killed it. Like they've done it really,
Yeah.
really well. So it aligned with what I wanted to do. In terms of the type of acquirer that I would want to work with. I knew that my people were going to a good company that was run well, that cared about people, that had the same cultural philosophies that we did, and like that was even more important than the monetary aspect of things.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes absolute sense. John, I could talk to you about this stuff all day, and I'm a little cognizant of time because you've been very generous so far, and I know we've been chatting for over an hour here. So, mate, I want to ask. I mean, are you happy with people reaching out and connecting with you and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not super visible on social medias these days, but LinkedIn's always a great way to find me. If anybody wants to connect and chat, I'm always happy to talk entrepreneurship and give advice to anybody that's in similar stages that I've been in. I think it's if anyone is listening and they are looking at doing an acquisition or selling, like it's a very rewarding process, but like the one thing I'll leave anybody with is just like make sure you do it with the right buyer. It is the biggest thing for me is I found the right partner in both the private equity group and the agency. It's resulted in it's a life-changing event for me, which is great, but also like I feel good about the transaction more than anything else. Like I know that I sold it to the right group, and I know that we've done well by our employees and by our clients and everything else. And that's the one thing that I could stress, and it's made it really great for me. Like I actually love what I'm doing now. I enjoy working with these guys, and not a lot of people that have sold will be able to say that, but I can unequivocally kind of answer that very easily. Like I like the role I'm in, and very happy with the way things worked out.
That's awesome. And if anybody's thinking about affiliate marketing and how to take that approach, clearly John's still over at Acceleration Partners. That's what they do. Please reach out, go and speak to them, because it certainly sounds to me like you're going to get the best in the industry helping you. So, Jonathan, mate, thank you once again for your time. Thank you for your generosity. You've shared so much with us, and I just know our listeners will get a lot of value out of this. And if nothing else from me personally, man, it's been really great chatting to you.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, T. Thanks so much for having me on. I enjoyed the conversation, and thanks so much.